Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Wanted to just catch up quickly on some of the recent Shedeur Sanders New York Giants chatter. Offer a few of my thoughts on what may or may not be going on here, and with a quick caveat. These are my opinions, my thoughts. I don't necessarily have inside information, although I have chatted with a few people to see what they think, may or may not be going on. And I have been paying attention to what some of the NFL insiders have said, in regards to their thoughts about what's going on. But these are my thoughts, my read potentially on the situation with Shedeur Sanders and the New York Giants. If you're just catching up on the news, the Giants have scheduled a private workout with Sanders in Boulder, Colorado on Thursday. This comes after the the end of 30 visits, which end on Wednesday. That's the last day teams can have players into their facilities, for any sort of in-person visitation, in facility visitation. The Giants are going out to Colorado, bringing a contingent of front office members, coaches out there. We don't know exactly who's going to be in attendance yet. Maybe we'll be able to find out a little bit more on Wednesday when Joe Shane meets the media for his pre-draft press conference. But for now, all we know for certain is that the Giants are going out to Colorado for one last on-field look at Shedeur Sanders. Now, what does that mean for the Giants in the upcoming 2025 NFL draft? Todd McShay of The Ringer, in his podcast on Tuesday, said that he had believed that the Giants were set on drafting Abdul Carter at number 3, with Cleveland taking Travis Hunter at number 2, and Tennessee, of course, taking Cam Ward at number 1. What McShay said on his most recent podcast was, don't close the book on Shedeur Sanders going number 3 to the New York Giants. He said he still believed that Abdul Carter would be the pick, but that the book was not completely closed on Shedeur Sanders. Something that Mike Tannenbaum, former New York Jets general manager, put out on social media after this news broke was that there's only 2 scenarios he's familiar with where something can happen this late that might change a team's draft plan, or that would really explain an extra workout this late in the process. And those 2 things for Tannenbaum were a disagreement, or what he said would be a big disagreement within the organization about a particular player or what they wanted to do with a particular pick. And the other thing that Tannenbaum referenced was the potential of new information about the player or players that a team would be considering at a certain pick. So let's talk about a little bit of that. And what I want to talk about, first and foremost, really is the idea of a disagreement in the Giants organization. The common working theory of late has been that the Giants would take the best player available at number 3, because they're under pressure to field the best possible team in 2025. With Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, they don't need a quarterback to start week 1. They don't need a rookie quarterback to start week 1. They may not need a rookie quarterback to contribute all season. So the working theory has been that the Giants would take the best player who could help them win games in 2025. I still believe that that's the way the Giants are going to approach this. I think that the Giants will most likely take the best player but that they'll circle back and see if there's a possibility that they can get back into round one for a quarterback, whether that ends up being Sanders, whether that ends up being Jackson Dart, whether that ends up being Jalen Milrow, I don't know. Largely probably depends on how much the Giants would be comfortable giving up and whether or not they'd be able to move up. The Falcons might be a spot where you can move up. That's at 15 in the draft. Atlanta only has 5 picks in the draft as of now. The Minnesota Vikings at 24 might be a spot where you can move up. Minnesota only has 4 picks in the draft as things stand right now. But in terms of big disagreement, I don't know if there is one. Would it shock me if there is? Absolutely not. Joe Shane, when he spoke at the combine, was very, very clear that 2025 was the priority. I've said this before, but he rarely mentioned anything beyond 2025. He understands that both he and Brian Daboll could lose their jobs if the Giants don't field a much better product in 2025 than they have in each of the last 2 seasons. I don't believe that Joe looks at Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart for that matter and sees a quarterback who should be selected at number 3 overall. I have said in the past that I can easily see Brian Daboll, who has an edge himself. He's a fiery guy. He's an emotional guy. He's not placid by any stretch of the imagination. I can easily see Brian Daboll falling in love with Shedeur Sanders. I can easily see Brian Daboll thinking this might be his last chance as a head coach to get his quarterback, to get the guy he wants. I can easily see Brian Daboll pounding the table, going to Joe Shane, going to John Mara and saying, give me this guy. Let's not screw around. Just give me this guy. Now, look, I don't have any information that says that's what's happening, but knowing what I know about Daboll, knowing what I know about Joe Shane, knowing what I know about the situation that the Giants are in, I can see that split as a possibility. I can see a difference of opinion there. Todd McShay mentioned the possibility of ownership getting involved. And excuse me. Listen, I don't see ownership. I don't see John Mara walking down to Joe Shane's office and saying, look, I'm making this decision. I'm telling you, you can or cannot draft Shedeur Sanders at number 3. You can or cannot trade up for Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart or whoever, Jalen Milrow, at whatever point in round 1. I think that if John Mara was going to operate that way, he would have pounded the table and not allowed Saquon Barkley out of the Giants organization. He would have, at some point in the negotiations between Shane and Barkley, he would have said, just get it done. Give him the extra $2 million, give him the extra guaranteed money. Do what you've got to do and keep Saquon Barkley in New York. I think a year ago, if John Mara was going to do what he wanted to do, he also, might have insisted that the Giants draft a quarterback. Maybe he would have said, go all in and trade whatever you have to trade to go up and get Drake May, or or you're drafting JJ McCarthy at number 6 and that's it because we simply have to have the quarterback of the future in the building. John Mara has not operated that way with Joe Shane and Brian Daboll to this point. What I can see in terms of ownership involvement in this situation is if there is a split between Shane and Daboll, if there is, a situation where the GM wants to take best player available and the head coach is insisting, and the head coach wants the quarterback. I can see ownership, which always signs off on quarterback decisions, coaching decisions, on the biggest decisions. I can see ownership breaking the tie. If if the GM and head coach can't resolve this, I can see ownership saying, "This is what we're going to do," and the head coach and the GM, having to abide by that. But I don't think John Mara is going to make this decision against the will of the head coach and the GM. If the head coach and the GM are in agreement that they want to do one thing, I don't think he's going to say, no, we're doing the other thing. But it is an interesting situation. As I said, I have thought all along that Shedeur Sanders is a guy that Brian Daboll could fall for. That's not necessarily skill wise because, skill wise, obviously the physical traits aren't what you'd really, really love to have. But I can see Daboll thinking he's got to have his guy before he gets run out of town, and hitching his wagon to to uh to Shedeur Sanders. Another thing that I'm reminded of as we sort of freak out about this late workout is that the Giants worked out JJ McCarthy over Easter weekend, just 4 or 5 days before the draft a year ago. They spent so much time with JJ McCarthy that McCarthy was convinced he was going to be a Giant. McCarthy said he spent more time with the Giants than any other team. So maybe this means that the Giants would consider Shedeur at 3. Maybe this means they want one more look at Sanders before they commit to the idea of taking best player at 3 and then trading back up for Sanders and giving up whatever draft assets are necessary. Maybe this is them, going out there for one final time to rule him out. We don't know for certain. We just know that it's interesting. There are a lot of different possibilities. Um, the one that the one that I'm intrigued by is the idea that that Shane and Daboll may not yet be fully in agreement on what they're going to do. We'll find out in a little bit more than a week. And just a reminder that Joe Shane does have his pre-draft press conference on Wednesday. Big Blue View is going to try to be there, hopefully to get a couple questions in. And even if I'm not able to get a couple questions in, it's always beneficial to to get the feeling in the room, to see how comfortable or uncomfortable the GM is in terms of the way that he answers questions, in terms of just what he says and how he says it. So if all goes well, if all goes according to plan, yours truly will be in East Rutherford on Wednesday to listen to Joe speak to media. Anyway, Giants fans, that's just a few thoughts on the Shedeur Sanders workout and what it may or may not mean for the Giants. So thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.